again, this is based on your comparison between the Reagan years and the present. The country's changed to some extent, in some ways deeply. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, in a 1965 report entitled, quote, "The Negro Family, the Case for National Action," quote, listen to this. This is Daniel Patrick Moynihan all those years ago. "The fundamental problem is that of family structure. The Negro family in the urban ghettos is crumbling. So long as this situation persists, the cycle of poverty and disadvantage will continue to repeat itself," close quote. When Moynihan wrote those words in '65, the illegitimacy rate among African Americans was 25%. Today among whites, over 30%. Among Hispanics, more than 50%. And among African Americans, over 70%. You could come up with reform conservatism on issue after issue after issue, but what does it matter if the American family continues to collapse?
This is what reform conservatism is all about. This is the entire focus of my conservative reform agenda, is to help strengthen and bolster the twin pillars of our civilization, free market economies and voluntary institutions of civil society, including families, including churches, synagogues, and other voluntary associations. The bigger government gets, the more muscle that it flexes, the more the muscle of free markets and civil society will tend inevitably to atrophy. And so reform conservatism focuses on how we can get the federal government to pull back, especially in those areas where it's causing a lot of these problems, where it's making more severe a lot of these societal problems that relate to the family structure and so forth, where it's holding people in poverty, where it's creating undue disincentives for people to work and to get married and to stay married. If we stop creating those disincentives, if we get the federal government in the right place, I think that
not necessarily smaller, but in the right place. Different programs? Are you saying that past a certain size, the federal government tends to crowd out family?
It tends almost inevitably to crowd other things out as it gets bigger and bigger. So yeah, I am saying it's necessary for it to be smaller, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you simultaneously shrink everything in the federal government at an equal rate, because there are some things that only the federal government can do. And there are other things that the federal government perhaps ought to allow someone else to do, whether that someone else is a state or a local government or a voluntary institution of civil society, for example.
Okay. One more quotation about the way the country has changed. This is David Brooks in the New York Times, American Exceptionalism. Is what he's writing about. Quote, "Now American attitudes resemble European attitudes, and when you look just at young people, American exceptionalism is basically gone. 50% of Americans over 65 believe America stands above all others as the greatest nation on earth. Only 27% of Americans ages 18 to 29 believe that," close quote. The premise of everything you say in your reform conservatism is a belief in the greatness of the country. Fewer and fewer young people share that belief.
I think that's a fair characterization, and I think it shouldn't be terribly surprising to us that this trend is developing in light of the fact that the federal government has given the American people, especially young Americans, a lot of reasons to be cynical, a lot of reasons to be skeptical about promises that it makes. Sure, we'll take your Social Security taxes, we'll keep them safe, while at the same time Congress goes and spends that money somewhere else, writing in effect an IOU back to itself, promising to fill in the gaps where it has robbed the American people of money that they put into what was supposed to be the Social Security Trust Fund. We've gotten the federal government involved in so many things that the federal government has inevitably created a lot of enemies and a lot of very cynical people. And so that's part of why this reform agenda is so necessary. If we get the federal government doing the things that it's supposed to do and starting to back away from the things that it doesn't do well, then I think we'll see a renewal of American exceptionalism.